Started. Thank you for everyone for joining us for the informational webinar on the City of Fayetteville and Fayetteville PwC disparity study. Before we get started, I want to just acknowledge two of our local subcontractor, Deborah Jessup is on with us, and David Camps, who again are our local partners. They're members of our team. I will acknowledge Saida Shabano, who is the Deputy Project Manager on the disparity study. Chris Bowers, who is the Assistant Deputy Project Manager on this study. Ajisaf Ayadajan, who's will be conducting the survey of business owners. I think that's all I see from our team. And my name is Michelle Clark Jenkins. I head the consulting group at Griffin & Strong, and I am the project manager on this project. I'd also like to acknowledge there's some members of the staff at the City of Fayetteville, as well as Fayetteville PwC. Although this informational meeting is being conducted by Griffin & Strong, they are here to listen. So if you have questions, please direct them to us. If there are some that we think are more appropriately answered by them, we will have them answer them. So let me get started. Okay. So first I'll start with just who we are, Griffin & Strong. We are an Atlanta-based law and public policy consulting firm. The consulting side of our business, this is all we do. We do disparity research. And that means not just disparity studies, but we get involved in diversity, supplier diversity consulting. We do compliance work. We do program development and creation. We do training. We also draft legislation. We believe we have the most qualified team in this industry. We have 4 attorneys, actually 5 now, 2 PhD economists, a PhD social psychologist, and a PhD in anthropology. It's going to become important later, as I'll point out, that no study we've done has ever been challenged or overturned in court. So I'm just going to introduce you to a couple of members of our project team. Our project team actually is about 12 direct project members, but I just want to introduce you again to our local partner, who is from Friedman, Thompson, Witt, Sabero, and Bird. Is that how and Bird? Deborah Jessup. She will be doing oversight on our legal analysis. Deborah, if you just want to say hi. I see her on. Okay.
Hello, I'm here.
Okay.
Hello, how is everyone?
Okay. And then our other local partner is HR Enterprises. David Camps is on. They're headquartered right there in Fayetteville, and they are doing our anecdotal outreaches as well as our anecdotal interviews. So David, if you want to say a hello.
Good evening, everyone in Fayetteville. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Okay, thank you, David. So I just want to introduce you to our principal investigator, Dr. J. Vincent Egan. Dr. Egan has conducted, it says over 120 disparity studies, but I think now he's probably closer to 150. He is an expert witness. The standing case in North Carolina, which is HB Rowe versus Tippett, which was a case brought against the state program for NCDOT. He was the expert witness who successfully defended the NCDOT state program. He's one of only a handful of people in the United States who have ever successfully defended this. He's a member of Bloomberg Business Week, and he's got his JD from Harvard. He's both an attorney and an economist. For those of you who like a little bit of trivia, if you have read President Obama's book, it will mention Vince as the person who talked him into running for president of the Harvard Law Review. So that's his little claim to fame. Rodney Strong, who is our chairman and CEO and the project executive, is a national expert in disparity studies. When he started our firm 27 years ago, he had just come from being director of contract compliance for the city of Atlanta. And he was part of a group of attorneys who kind of watched some cases come up through the Supreme Court and really was part of the creation of disparity studies. And I will talk about that a little bit later. But he was the project manager on the first municipal post-Croson disparity study and the principal architect of the City of Atlanta's EBO program, which became the model for the nation. So let me talk a little bit about starting with what is a disparity study so that everyone understands what we're talking about. A disparity study is an objective research tool. So we don't come with it with any foregone conclusions about what its outcomes are going to be or what programs we're going to recommend. It determines whether a governmental entity has actively or passively discriminated against certain groups in their procurement based on race and gender. It's also been used to be kind of a benchmark measurement for race and gender neutral groups like small businesses and veterans, but you really don't need a disparity study to have programs or remedial programs for those groups. You just have to have a rational basis. And the discrimination that we're talking about, when I use that term, it's actually a term from the Croson case, which is an inference of discrimination. And it is not an indictment against any particular administration. What it is saying, of all of the history behind us, here's where we are. And here's what the objective balance or imbalance of contracting is. So it is the current effects of past discrimination, which we determine through statistical and anecdotal means. And when we're done with this study, we will make recommendations that, if they are accepted by the city or by PwC, are meant to become policy.
So what is this? What is the study process? This is basically our overall methodology as to how we go about and do our research. The disparity study takes about a year to complete. So we start off with a legal analysis because disparity studies are a creation of the court. We then do a deep dive into the city's policies and procedures. A huge part of the study is getting and collecting data. We're going to take a look at 3 years of data for almost every penny that the city and PwC has spent and who it's gone to. We also take a look at local subcontractors as well. We have to determine what the geographic area is in terms of firms and their location. And that is really determined by the area in which the city has been spending at least 75% of its dollars. Then we take a look at utilization and threshold analysis, which is where they are spending their money. We look at availability, basically who are the ready, willing, and able firms in the market. We compare those two things and assess the disparity analysis. We then have to take a look at whether the disparity is statistically significant and take a look at what are the potential causes of the disparity. We do what's called a regression analysis, which is to equalize all external potential causal factors of the study. And then if there is still a disparity, once we equalize those out, we then proceed with making race and gender neutral remedies. We also take a look at credit markets, construction markets through building permit data and employment, and then also the likelihood of self-employment. And then we collect anecdotal evidence and analysis. And then we compile all of that, and then we compose a final report.
Again, we come back to why do we do disparity studies in the first place? And why is it that we have to jump through kind of all these hoops to remediate what a lot of people will say, well, gee, we kind of knew that. So what the Supreme Court said for the first time in this case, City of Richmond versus J.A. Croson, which is a 1989 case, for the first time, it equated malevolent discrimination with benevolent remediation of discrimination. So in other words, what the court was saying is the 14th Amendment says everybody has to be treated alike. So whenever you do anything that does not treat people alike based on suspect classes like race or gender, you have to, the court is going to look at you with kind of a side eye. It's going to use strict scrutiny, which is the highest level of review that judicial review that they can take of something. In other words, they have elevated how deeply they're going to look at what you're doing. And so in order to overcome, and for those of you who may be attorneys, you know from law school that strict in scrutiny, strict in theory, fatal in fact. Well, so again, Rodney Strong was part of a group of attorneys and economists who watched this case come up and began to fashion some responses to it. So what we had to do was to overcome this issue of strict scrutiny. And so we do that in two ways. One, whatever you're doing has to have a factual basis in evidence. In other words, there has to be a compelling governmental issue for them to say, let's treat some people differently in this particular situation. Let's remediate what has happened in the past. So our methodology is very much dictated by case law. In some cases, it may seem counterintuitive, but it's what the courts will accept to uphold these programs. The other thing is that anything you do in a program that is the result of a disparity study has to be narrowly tailored from that study. So we've heard in jurisdictions, well, we have 51% African-American population. Why can't we get 51% of the contracts? And it's because what the court said in Croson was that it's based on the availability of firms in your marketplace. So it doesn't have anything to do with population. We also are required to first look at race and gender neutral remedies if we do see a disparity, and then we can look at race and gender conscious remedies. So one of the first things, as Sayeda said, we're going to do is look at policy, do a policy review. And that's a deep dive into the policy. We want to know, is there anything on the face of either the city or PwC's written policies and procedures that could present a barrier, particularly to MWBE inclusion? Does everybody understand the policies as they're written? Is there a difference between policy and practice? And then ultimately, what policies and procedures can be modified to promote MWBE participation? Again, relevant market is where we have to start. And that answers the question, what are we studying and who are we studying? So it's not just firms necessarily in Fayetteville. We kind of borrow from antitrust law and say, where is the marketplace for Fayetteville and Fayetteville PwC? And remember, they're a little different in that PwC is a utility. So where are the vendors where they're spending at least 75% of their dollars? That becomes our relevant market. And we start with Fayetteville proper. We start to pull out until we get to that point, radiate out until it becomes a marketplace where they're already spending at least 75% of their dollars. And that becomes our geographic relevant market. We then also have to look at the products. So when we start to look at who are the firms who are ready, willing, and able to perform for the city and for PwC, we've got to look at the product markets. So if we've got hairdressers in your marketplace, but you're not buying hairdressing services, then hairdressers won't be part of our analysis. So utilization is pretty straightforward. As Sayeda said, it's 3 years, every penny spent, excluding only not what's spent with not-for-profits, what is spent with other government agencies and things that in which there is kind of no choice. So if you were going to take a train trip someplace, you don't have a choice of which train you're going to go on because there's only one train that goes on that track. So those are the only things that are excluded from our analysis. We will assign and see what is the balance of utilization. In other words, where are they spending their dollars based on race and gender and ethnicity. We do look at both prime and subcontractors. And then threshold analysis is really what's the level of contracting that the city and PwC are doing. Are they doing a bunch of big contracts so that sizing may be an issue? Are they doing a lot of little contracts? Part of it is to see, is there an opportunity for small businesses? And the majority of minority and women-owned business tend to be small. Is there an opportunity for them to, who have been operating as subcontractors, to now move over and become prime contractors and grow their capacity? So that's what we do. We look at threshold. Threshold also helps us to look at capacity. You know, some of the answer is, well, all of these firms that you have put as available firms, they're little businesses. They can't do $20 million contracts. Well, that may be true, but if 50% of your contracts are under $500,000, they can perform on that, even as small businesses. So then availability is kind of the most controversial part of a disparity study. Who are the ready, willing, and able firms? And it's really a very simple definition, that they are on a government list somewhere. So they've at least expressed interest in doing business with government. So they're registered, they're certified, they are bidders, they're vendors, they're awardees, they're subcontractors. Somewhere they're on those lists for Fayetteville and Fayetteville PwC. They're also maybe on county lists, city lists, DOT's list, state of North Carolina. Again, they are firms who operate in the areas in which those two entities are purchasing, and they exist within the relevant market, and they have expressed a willingness to do business with government. When it comes to capacity, that's a different issue, and we deal with that in a number of ways. One, which I mentioned, is through a threshold analysis. So then we get to the important analysis, which is disparity. And what is a disparity determination? Is determined by comparing utilization to availability. So if you have 100 African-American owned engineering firms, or you have 100 general engineering firms total in your marketplace, and 10 of them are African-American, you have a 10% availability of African-American owned engineering firms. But then when we look at the dollars spent, if we see that only 2% of the dollars have been spent with African-American owned engineering firms, then we have a 10% availability compared to a 2% utilization, and that creates a disparity. They're not the same. So then we have to test it to see if that disparity is significant. And if you have 2% compared to 10%, that's going to be a significant disparity. Then we have to determine what was the likely cause of the disparity. We just can't jump to, well, there's a disparity, therefore it's caused by race and gender identity of that firm. We have to test it for other likely explanations, like how long the firm's been in business, the size of its workforce, the revenues, the education of the owner. There are a number of things, and we go back and equalize them, comparing them to non-MWBE firms. And if at the end of the day, after testing them, there still remains a disparity, then the court says you can now make that inference that it is the race and gender and ethnicity of the ownership that has caused this disparity. I mean, in some ways, we've kind of proven statistically that discrimination exists. So then the last part of our analysis is a marketplace disparity analysis. And we have to go there because if we stop with the analysis of just the spend of the city and PwC, then we wouldn't account for things like, well, there are no Hispanic American-owned construction companies. We didn't use any, therefore no discrimination. There aren't any, we didn't use any, no discrimination. Well, you have to say, well, why aren't there any? What's going on in the marketplace? So in the marketplace, we look at the likelihood of self-employment. We look at whether there are disparities in the credit market. And we also review building permit data because that tells us without any kind of government interference or any kind of programs, what is it that just the free market holds in and around this area in the construction industry, which is usually where the big dollars are spent. And really this all tells us whether all of this testing is whether disparities can be explained by factors other than race or gender.
So we have a number of ways that we use to gather anecdotal evidence. We host a series of informational meetings to,
I'm sorry.
You're fine. So we host a series of informational meetings to first kick off with the community members, allowing them the opportunity to meet our firm, get to know our process, and make them abreast to what we are hoping to accomplish during the study, and letting them know ways to be engaged and involved. We also conduct a series of anecdotal interviews, which basically entails getting feedback from business owners about their experiences, both positive and negative, doing or attempting to do business with the city and PwC. We put out a survey of business owners, which is a 10 to 15-minute survey that is designed to capture demographics, statistical, and anecdotal information regarding local businesses, their operating capacity, impressions on doing the business, and so on. We then host a series of public hearings and focus groups and business and civic trade organizational meetings, which are primarily just other methods that we use to ensure that we have a diverse group for collecting anecdotal evidence. We also utilize email and social media such as Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn as a means to communicate with the public and then also keep them updated on community events and what Griffin & Strong is doing with the disparity study.
So at the end of the study, we have findings from all of the different analysis that we've done. We come together, kind of compare all of our findings, and then come out with recommendations. And again, it's important for all of you who are on this Zoom call to participate in our upcoming meetings, particularly our public hearings that will be coming up, I think, in the winter. I guess it'll be in the winter, because that's how we come up with our recommendations. When we look back at the statistical stuff, we'll see whether there's an issue or not, whether there's disparity or no disparity. And if there's a disparity, now we have to say, how do we fix that? How do we remediate that? What kind of programs will work for this area? And we can't know what those are other than, I mean, we do use our own expertise and best practices, but the uniqueness about your marketplace and doing business here, we won't know unless you tell us. So we need you to participate in our survey if you get it. We need you to participate in our public hearings so we can hear about your own experiences, both positive and negative, in doing business with the city of Fayetteville and with Fayetteville PwC. So we'll use what you've said, we'll combine that with best practices and come up with ideas on how to remediate whatever disparities we find. So how can you all get involved? And I've mentioned some of that. If you are contacted to do an anecdotal interview, which is really a case study, we have David Camp and his group will be sitting down and doing these like hour-long interviews to kind of get your story. We'll be doing a survey of business owner. So Creative Research Solutions, Adejafe Adejan and his group will be administering that. We will be doing focus groups. So if you get asked to participate in any of those, please say yes. And then please attend our public hearing. We will be doing email blasts. So anybody who's on this Zoom call will get a notice of when our public hearing is. We'll be doing a press release. We'll be getting on calendars. Both the city and PwC will be helping us do outreach. You can also email your comments to us at fayettevillestudy@gspclaw.com or fayetteville.pwcstudy@gspclaw.com. Sayeda will put those two email addresses in the chat room. So if you're not a person who wants to come out in the public and talk about your experiences, then please email us your experiences. All of them will equally be considered in the study. And then to stay involved with us, we are very active on social media, and we do have a website, FayettevilleDisparityStudy.com, which is a dedicated website. This presentation will be posted there, along with information about upcoming events. As we have more meetings, those videos will be posted there. More information about our firm is there, as well as some frequently asked questions about disparity studies. So this is the timeline. We really got started this summer doing data assessment, figuring out where all this data is, who has it, and how it's kept. We've done the legal review. This is our first informational meeting, and the website is launched. So then we will start to do interviews, internal interviews, data collection. We're already in data collection, trying to collect the data that the city and PwC has. And then we'll get into our survey sometime in the winter and preparing databases. Again, the biggest, really from start to finish, is assessing, cleaning, processing, preparing databases, and running our analysis really takes the whole year while we're doing other stuff. Okay, so that's really our presentation today, and we are open for any questions you might have about us or about the study. And you can use your raise hand function, or you can wave at me, and anybody who's on the phone can just unmute if you have a question. No questions. Okay.
Can you repeat your email address again? Your website again, please?
It's FayettevilleDisparityStudy.com. And I think it's
put in the
chat room.
Mm-hmm. I'll put it in the chat once again.
Okay. Okay, if there are no questions, I will ask if Kimberly Toon, or did I see Lexi Hassipis would like to just make a comment and maybe greet you before we say goodbye.
Good evening. My name is Kimberly Toon. I am the purchasing manager for the city of Fayetteville. I'm excited to see everyone who has joined this call this afternoon. We are super excited to be able to complete this disparity study on behalf of the city of Fayetteville. We are committed to having diversity in our procurement. And so this is just an added bonus to us to complete this study. We're falling behind the state of North Carolina, so we're excited. And again, I just thank you for participating this afternoon.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. In reading your study that you did for North Carolina Department of Administration, so when you basically go about determining the dollars spent for either men, women, MBs, et cetera, in that particular report, you showed it was $100 million that was spent on goods and service, 91 on construction. But when we looked at the, actually, these are for state universities, but when you looked at state universities for that particular year, they spent about $2.5 billion. So how you go about determining, you just use the figure that they use for set aside?
No. The figure, so you're talking about the DOA state agencies, you're talking about the
No,
colleges and
ma'am.
universities?
Yeah, in your study was table 11, which said North Carolina hub
Right,
utilization.
we do use the payments. We use all payments. The only thing we're excluding from payments, and when it came to the state agencies, we used the dollars from the controller's office. When we went to the colleges and universities, we had to get 58 different sets of data from the community colleges and 21 different sets of data from the universities, and it was all payment data. So what was actually paid out. And now remember that we're looking at procurement. So it's not 100% of their budget, because remember, part of their budget is employees, it's for other things. So we looked at all the payments that they made. The only things excluded from that were payments they made to other government entities, to not-for-profits, and certain places where they didn't kind of have a choice.
Okay, well, I understand what you're saying as far as for payment, but I think we can't really say that they're reporting all their numbers. For instance, let's say North Carolina State University, who receive other governmental funds, which is basically should be reported, but I don't think they would necessarily be reported in this particular study.
Oh, no, every source was reported. Again, we used payment dollars. So we didn't care where the source of dollars came from. We cared about where they were paid out to.
Oh, okay. Well, I just know for a fact when you look at the numbers, then they're not reporting their numbers. Thank you.
You're welcome. No other questions? Okay. All right, well, with that, we really thank you. We'll give you back a substantial amount of your time this evening. We are very appreciative. Please, again, be on the lookout to be able to provide us with your experiences through one of the anecdotal means. It really is critical. I mean, we've been in jurisdictions where we can't get firms to fill out the survey. And if we can't get you to fill out the survey and we can't get you to agree to do interviews, it's lacking the input of the business community. So please be a part of that. I see Sandra Williams has her hand up. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. In regard to that, if we are contacted.
We can't quite hear you. Go ahead, let me try.
If we are contacted, is this information anonymous that we give you?
Yes. So when you're involved in any of our non-public, because of course you're out in the public, it's kind of hard to be anonymous. But if you're giving us any of the interviews or focus groups or surveys or anything like that, we do not use any names. You're given kind of a code, like interviewer number 2-5 said this. So yeah, it is anonymous to the extent that we can. Obviously, if there becomes any kind of litigation, sometimes they can ask for stuff, but other than that, we don't publish names.
Thank you.
David, you have your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to ensure that the importance of this study, and that the individuals that are on this line here now, we've had up to 43 people that were on at any given time, that if you would notify other businesses that you know in the area, that we will have more sessions like this where we want their input. This is very important for the community so that we can understand how the dollars are spent.
Okay.
Sorry, I just had one quick clarification regarding anonymity. So just so that we're clear, for the survey of business owners, we do collect the name of the business and the business owner, and that's for verification purposes. However, that information is still kept confidential.
Yeah, we do know your names. We just don't tell anybody else. Yeah, and governments have, I don't know of any of our clients who have not really honored that, because otherwise it would be chilling for people to not have an open door. And we're doing a study right now where we held a public hearing, and people, they were on the line, but they wouldn't talk. And they said they wouldn't talk at all. They wouldn't tell us anything. And we found out later that that was because there was concern about not being anonymous. So we had to rehold meetings where there was, where people were very clear about anonymity. But we want you to be able to tell us your honest thoughts and your experiences. I mean, we're really not asking so much for opinions, we're asking for real experiences, because your experiences and what you, again, positive or negative. And we have done studies where people have said, this is a great place to do business with. So it's not all complaining. Okay. All right, going once, going twice. Okay. Well, again, thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate and want to honor your time in participating with us. Please be part of our team. This is the other thing you can help us with. We use organizations, local organizations, to outreach to their membership, because sometimes, even though we're looking for firms to count as available who are on governmental lists, we also want to know firms that are developing firms. How can we help them to develop? And there may not be on some of the lists we have, but they'll be members of some other organizations. We also want organizations to give us their input. So if there is an organization that you belong to, or that you think we should be contacting or interviewing as part of the community, please put it in the chat room. So we will make sure that we contact that organization and ask for their participation, and particularly ask them to outreach to their own membership to get their membership to participate. So we're going to stay on the line a little bit longer, just so if anybody's thinking of organizations that they know, you can put that in the chat room. But for anyone else, we will release you to the rest of your evening, and thank you for joining us. You'll hear back from us very soon.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Have a good evening. You too. Have a good evening.
Good evening. Take care, everybody.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.
Hey, wait a minute, Michelle. Somebody's asking me a question to type.
Okay.
They're asking me some information in the chat. Okay. Okay. All right. So most of them was just asking for, my personal contact information. So.
Oh, okay, that must have come to you directly.
Yeah, it did. It did. It was privately. Yeah, I had a couple of them. All right. Well, thank you once again, ma'am.
Okay. All right. And I'm going to save the chat room because there are a couple of people, Sayeda, who gave us contacts.
Yes, I jot those down.
Great. All right. Good night. Thank you, David.
Have a good one.
Thank you, Kimberly.